Okay, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in and joining us for this discussion. We have a very enlightening conversation ahead of us involving two very important people. The first of which is our guest who will be discussing the contents of his new book. He is the vice president and the head of pricing at a phenomenal company called Holden Advisors. He's a keynote speaker and author and a great friend of the Pricing Society. His name is Jeet Mukherjee. How are you doing today, Jeet?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Good.
Doing well. Our second guest is the president of the Professional Pricing Society. He also is a renowned speaker, pricing expert, and a knowledgeable resource within the industry. His name is Kevin Mitchell. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kevin. How are you doing today?
Terrence, Jeet, I'm doing very well and very happy to have the opportunity to talk with you today. So all good on my end. Appreciate that, gentlemen.
Absolutely. Now, Jeet, quick introduction there. I understand you have a new book that's about to launch very soon. We're very excited to have you share that with us. But first, this is meant to be a free-form discussion between you and Kevin. So if you could please tell us a little bit about the book, and then I'll let Kevin take it away to help you explain the finer details of it.
Sure. So excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity, first of all. I started this journey by chatting with a few of the leaders of various organizations in different industries to kind of understand how pricing is evolving and what's happening. And this is right when inflation was kind of hitting. And a lot of these execs started talking about inflation, talking about market volatility. And at that time, we got a call from the publisher saying, hey, do you want to do a book? Do you want to do a second edition that focuses on market volatility, specifically around inflation? And Reed and I thought, Reed Holden, for those of you that don't know, but I'm sure most of you do, I had written the first edition of Pricing with Confidence. And we said, you know what? We can do a second edition with a focus specifically around inflation and market volatility. So those interviews that I did with those market leaders kind of dovetailed into the book. And we used a lot of those anecdotes, a lot from those interviews into the book to really make it specific on what theoretically we should be doing in times like this, and also examples of what they're doing, the market leaders, from everything that they've done and didn't do well, what happened, and the things that they did do well, what happened. So that's in the book as well. So we're excited to kind of package that together, and hopefully people will find it valuable.
Yeah, that's great. And Jeet, also, since we're in kind of a golden age of pricing literature there, and I clearly remember when the first edition of Reed Holden's book, Pricing with Confidence, came out, and it was such an eye-opener for a lot of us in the pricing discipline, a lot of us who do revenue management, a lot of us who work with sales teams, and likewise. And of course, we both have known Reed for quite some time. And we were joking before when we couldn't remember the exact year that Pricing with Confidence came out. My guess of 1945 was a little too soon, just a little bit. I was a little early on that. But it has been 14 years, almost 15 years. So we're very, very happy to see the updates, particularly, as you mentioned, also the focus on the critical issues that we're all facing today around inflation, around economic uncertainty, and some of the lessons that we have there that we can also take advantage of from that. So yeah, this is very exciting. And of course, Pricing with Confidence is one of a small number of books that basically are so much a part of the pricing canon that it really is a wonderful thing to see a second edition that's going to keep current and talk about some current issues that we're all facing today as well. So congratulations on the upcoming publication there. This is great news.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously Pricing with Confidence, it's critical in sort of value-based pricing and theory. And it also started with Reed and Tom Nagel with Strategy and Tactics of Pricing. And that was such a revolutionary book. And I got to spend, obviously, I worked at Strategic Pricing Group years ago, and that's how I knew Reed. And the evolution of pricing philosophy, and then Reed kind of took it to the next level to tie the sales aspect of it with pricing. And that's where Pricing with Confidence came to be. And that's just such a groundbreaking and phenomenal sort of perspective, because we think that you can have the fanciest math and you can do the best work to get to the quote unquote right price. But if you can't empower your sales organization to actually utilize that price or stick to that price as close as possible, then a lot of effort is going to be wasted. So that book, the first edition, was just groundbreaking in being able to connect the sales activation with the price setting based on value. That's just, it was great. And I'm glad that we were able to do a second edition to update it because of the market volatility.
Yeah, no doubt. And the intersection of pricing and sales, as you mentioned there, Jeet, that's so critical because a lot of this, if you've been doing pricing for a while, you know about the 1% example. You know that we're the lever that you want to pull in order to raise your profitability, raise your margin, raise your performance that way. But until it really hits the street, until your sales team buys in and you've got that great Venn diagram overlap with them where you're all on the same team and moving forward, it really can be kind of an ivory tower academic theoretical type of exercise until it gets out there with your salespeople that are out there on the street, and until he or she or they really buy into it, then really you can't really have that full actualization of the upside and of the positive things that can come about through acumen and business improvements and through strategic pricing and things like that. So I've always liked the approach that Reed and everyone on the Holden Advisors team that I've been talking with over the years, where they always have that central focus on, okay, we're going to talk about some pricing things that we all know, but we're also going to talk about this from a sales perspective and look really at how your salespeople, once they are out there in front of Mr. or Mrs. Customer, how they can really bring that to fruition there as well.
That's right. And it's also important, to know attribution or understand attribution, because you have all these activities you do for pricing. And if you're failing because your sales organization is not armed properly, then how do you know which part of your process is not doing well? Because you're going to get false positives. You're going to be like, oh, price is wrong. Or is it a behavioral thing? Is it a training issue? Is it whatever? And it's just very difficult if you don't think of this holistically. I think there's a lot of false positive, and you're not going to be able to identify root causes to be able to fix and do better at the next run when it comes to pricing.
Definitely. I remember, Terrence, I'm not exactly sure of the year, but one of probably the first or second time that when I was re-involved with PPS that Reed Holden spoke at one of our conferences, I remember someone asked him, what's the real low-hanging fruit for pricing professionals? What's the easy thing that we can go back to our offices and do on Monday morning that's going to help our organizations out? And I am not going to try to replicate Reed Holden's South Boston accent or his language here. But basically, if you know Reed, you can probably imagine what's coming up. But his answer was, number one is stop doing dumb things that don't work. Stop doing dumb stuff. And he did not say stuff. He used a much more colorful, let's say, term than that. And I know that a lot of that comes into pricing with confidence as well. And a lot of that has been part of that's been part of the literature that he and now you are giving to us as pricing professionals, and basically a way to say, okay, remember what your company's there for, remember what you provide to your marketplace. And we're all consumers at a certain level. We're all people at a certain level. And of course, one of the rules of economics is people will respond to incentives. Make sure those incentives are also driving the information and the actions that you and your company want as well. So a lot of it throughout Pricing with Confidence are just these great lessons that we can really go back and apply at our offices on Monday morning after reading it. So yeah, definitely like stuff like that.
Yeah, it's he is very colorful, and we've got a couple of lines in the book, that he does a good job of putting together. But it's interesting because those words, it sounds simple, but just imagine, especially in volatile times, inflation's going up. Are we going to go to a recession? Are we not? Are we in stagflation? So there's all these verbiage, these words that are out there. But it does come down to some of the basic principles. One of the things that Reed and I, after doing our research and after talking about it and debating, there's some simple things that are out there. One is, the thing that we talk about all the time is, profitability should be king. Revenue should not be king, especially when you talk about market volatile times. I don't know why, but people, it's in our DNA to focus on revenue, focus on those blue birds, focus on those big accounts, those big deals. Yeah, those are really sexy and great. But what about long-term profitability? Because that is what gives you that margin of error, that in a volatile market, you need that margin of error to go out and try different strategies, do different things. If you want to build a flanking product because a recession's coming, you have that cash basis to be able to do and try those things. And if you still focus on revenue being king and you're going after market share during volatile times, which you could with undisciplined pricing, you're not going to be there very long, because if you don't have that profitability, you just don't have that margin of error to survive. So it sounds basic, but it's a key principle that he's talking about there that really applies during market times like this. So it's kind of exciting to be able to do it in that manner.
Definitely. And with the focus on long-term profitability, I think that that's a key as well. Just because, as we've seen with how Wall Street analysts and other big analysts are taking publicly held corporations to task, not only on that top line, not only on that revenue line, but basically flowing through the whole P&L and looking for kind of a long-standing stream of profitability there. That's always so much more important. And I've always thought that just the fact that kind of revenue is on the very top of the P&L, that's where we would go first. And sometimes we have had far too much of a focus on there, and market share as well. It's like, hey, market share, if you really want market share and you're willing to give up the ship for it, you can get market share. But as Jeet, as you mentioned there, it probably won't be the market share you want. It may not be as profitable as you want, and you'll be giving up so many things that it will not be worth your while. So we definitely need to keep that focus on the profitability. And I love your statements, and I love how the book talks about, not only is it a short-term jump to your profitability, because that can have consequences down the line, but we need to really think of a customer lifetime value type of approach, or looking from a business unit approach or a geographical approach. What's going to be the long-standing way that we can achieve our goals there? And yeah, long-term profitability, no one should have a problem with that at all. That is the engine that lets us to continue to invest in R&D, to continue to build, to continue to hire, to continue to provide more things for our respective marketplaces there. So yeah, that focus is key. It sounds simple, but if you've been in an organization where you've had a focus on either the extreme short term or on just the revenue or on just the market share for decades, then that change management can be so difficult there. It might seem to be a subtle shift, but as we know, we're human beings. Inertia is easy, change is hard, and there's a lot of work that can be done and needs to be done there as well.
That's right. Especially, you mentioned it before, especially if Wall Street or if the market rewards you for focusing on revenue. So if you have a sales organization that gets rewarded financially for focusing on revenue, you've got the market that rewards you for having that growth on the top line, then you have those bad behaviors that just start setting in, and you don't make those decisions. You choose to buy those poor businesses because you're literally buying them in order to make that top line look good. And that bad habit, we see it all over the place. We still see it to this day.
Definitely. And Jeet, I have a question here from knowing the first edition of Pricing with Confidence very well, and knowing the work that you had to do to modernize it, basically to bring it into today's economy, into today's terms. And also, I know enough around publishing that whenever there's a well-established author and a new valued co-author, oftentimes that co-author does, let's say, the vast majority of the work in a lot of cases, to put it politely there. How are you able to use your experience? Obviously, you've known Reed for a long time, rely on his decades of experience and modernize the book to bring it up to something that's extremely relevant for people in our part of the business world today?
Yeah, I think the partnership with Reed and I absolutely love it, because he is so creative and he has such an incredible base of learning and knowledge. It's just incredible. And if we start with that base of value-based pricing, the notion of fair pricing, setting that, And then you add the context of what's going on in today's world, which I kind of bring to the table because, as part of Holden Advisors, I run the pricing organization. So we're very close to what are the clients facing today? What are their pain points? What's happening? What's caused by the market? What's caused by internal issues? All of those things, I can kind of bring that to the table. And then him and I could sit down together and talk about what does that mean? Does that mean that the basic principles of value-based pricing needs to get adjusted, or are we applying it in different ways for these different market conditions that are coming up? And those conversations were just fantastic. And I think that's why the partnership worked in writing in this book.
Got you. And another thing that you mentioned there was the term fair pricing. And I know that we hear value-based pricing not only in the literature, not only in conferences like PPS conferences and others, and basically out there we hear that in organizations as well. So I think it's kind of interesting, Jeet, that you placed a specific reliance on fair pricing because, of course, if we were truly able to ascertain everybody's value and charge that, then that wouldn't leave any real gain for them, and that might have a negative repercussion down the line. So I'm wondering what led you and Reed and your organization kind of to, I wouldn't say replace the term value-based pricing with fair pricing, but why the focus on fair pricing as we look forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I appreciate that because we did spend some time talking about that. We haven't changed any of the fundamental principles of value-based pricing. What we really talked about was, if you have differential value, you've got a space relative to your competitors that you can price. So what we're finding is a lot of these customers, a lot of our clients, not a lot, I shouldn't say it that way, some of these clients are getting closer and closer to that edge, to that top. And what we're finding is those price increases are happening. And we know that a client's customers' price sensitivity exponentially goes up as price increases happen over a short period of time. So even as a consumer, if you think about it, as a consumer, if I get price increases from my gas company or electric company or whatever it might be, I'm okay if the price increases happen every year or 2 years or 3 years. But if it starts happening every 3 months and I'm getting multiple ones that are happening in short period of time, my price sensitivity doesn't stay the same. It actually exponentially goes up. So it's very important to understand what's fair. What can you actually do? Because you don't want to hit that inflection point. Because if you hit that inflection point, what really happens is that consumer or that customer starts looking at alternatives. And you don't want that to happen. You don't want your customers looking for alternatives. So therefore, how do you do this correctly? And Reed and I kind of went back and forth, and we think fair pricing is the way to do it. And like you correctly pointed out, we want to share in that differential value. We want our customers to understand that value, to get to feel that value, to accept that value, to have that value. And once we can do that, then we can start talking about what kind of price increases can we do? What kind of value changes can we do? Should we build a flanking product to reduce the value so your price comes down and you don't have to go to alternative sources for the goods that you're buying now? So those types of conversations are all related to that fair capture rate for that price. So you share in that value.
Yeah, I like it. It's kind of a partnership with the customer and your organization, and in some ways maybe the marketplace as a whole, where you're showing that we've got this value that we can give, here's a fair price for it. It's a nice trade-off and hopefully a win-win there, instead of something that might be kind of lopsided one way or the other. So I like that as kind of a long-term approach in maintaining great partnerships with the marketplace, with your customer, and also kind of building a culture within your own organization that says, we know that we deliver great value to our marketplace, to our customers. We are going to make sure that we get a fair value for that so that we can keep going and we can keep reinvesting and we can continue to do the great things that our company provides. And also that gives the customer and the marketplace a little bit of skin in the game, so to speak, as well, where they are getting their share as well. So yeah, I definitely like that. And Jeet, I was wondering one thing. A lot of things that we're talking about, as we kind of mentioned earlier, On the surface, they may seem to be rather easy, but again, we know, having been around corporate America for a long time and seeing how some things work, is that, sometimes these subtle changes can be rather difficult to do. So in a couple instances that you gave, where obviously if your sales team is compensated on pure top line revenue, then that's what they will bring. But there are a lot of organizations that I've come across that have had pricing people that say, our salespeople are compensated like that. I've tried to suggest the change, but I don't really have the pull or the political capital or the status or something like that to exact that change. What would you recommend in situations where companies might have that semi-natural butting of heads between, say, pricing, finance, marketing, or a product group, which might be more on margins or more on profit, versus a sales group that is going to do what they're told, and what they're being told right now is to focus on revenue or units or volume or something like that? What would you recommend in that situation there?
Yeah, that's a bit of a loaded question. We actually answer that in a chapter that we have in the book. So that's great. Thanks for that one. But I think it's loaded. It's because I feel like as companies, if you're close to the revenue, you tend to have more power. So in our organization, if I look at organizationally, not as a market, but as an organization, individuals that are close to the revenue tend to get more influence in the company, which means who? Sales. Sales have a lot of influence. So I don't care how smart the pricing person is, sales will typically have more influence. Therefore, a lot of times the sales, whatever issues they're bringing up, those will get handled first before anything else. And that focus on top line typically happens through that process. So then it begs the question, where does pricing sit? Should pricing sit in marketing? Should it sit in sales? Should it sit in product development? Should it sit in wherever? You pick the place. And what we kind of go through is talk about, depending on where it sits, it has different levels of prioritization. So as an example, if it sits in finance, it tends to be very numeric driven and not value driven. If it sits in marketing, it tends to be very promotional driven and some value, but not really margin driven. So there needs to be a balance. So our thought process is it needs to have that elevation, just like marketing, sales, and others. Pricing needs to be elevated. It needs to be elevated to a chief pricing officer. It needs to have that level of visibility, because that's one of the greatest, I think you said it yourself, that 1% rule. It has the biggest impact on your profitability, and it needs to have a seat at the table to have that influence, so you can have a very equal, healthy conversation with the sales leader on where we should focus, how we should focus, and where that long-term profitability is going to come from. And I think that's our kind of stance here, is pricing should not be embedded in marketing or any other organization. It needs to stand on its own and have that level of power, so you can wield those strategic decisions together with the rest of the organization.
Yeah, definitely. And would wholeheartedly agree there. And of course, our organization and yours as well, being for, by, and about pricing people all the time, and that intersection with sales, and basically looking to elevate either through training, through networking, through resources, through the great literature like your book, and looking at other ways that we can really get educated, we can train, we can network, and do better to show our worth within the organizations. And we have a speaker coming up, someone that I've known for a while, but basically anything that we buy around the world is probably shipped on a blue CHEP pallet that we've seen on trucks and things like that. And I happen to know Patience Mutiso, who leads a pricing center of excellence at CHEP, and she said something very similar to what you're saying. And that is, a lot of people, when asked where pricing should sit in the organization, will give you the old consultant answer where it depends. It just depends. And her answer was, yes, it does depend, but ideally pricing would sit as close to where the big decisions in the organizations are made, which can change based on the organization's goals as well. But definitely looking for ways to elevate, to get higher up the org chart, to get the importance that we deserve, to get the training that we deserve, to get the expertise and the literature and the information and the networking that we deserve as well is very key there. But yeah, ideally, we would like to see pricing councils with C-level, pricing being a part of C-level discussions, and much more there because of the importance it is that it brings to the business world and to the organization as we look forward as an ongoing concern. So definitely would agree with that.
Yeah, and I think it starts with conferences like yours where you get that momentum and that conversation going, because pricing is so emotional, right? I've been in pricing for 20 plus years, and that's one of the things that even in a B2B setting, pricing is emotional. And people don't want to talk about it, and people stop talking about it. And when you do that, it doesn't get elevated to that strategic level that it needs to make these decisions, to make the right decisions for the company, for the health of the company. So I really think it starts with these types of conferences where we're comfortable talking to each other, different companies in different industries, talking about pricing, what's healthy, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well. Those conversations typically don't happen. People will keep that close to their vest. They talk about marketing, they talk about sales, they talk about all these other tactics, social media, but they don't want to talk about pricing. And that, makes it less like a strategic conversation and more tactical, that's embedded in marketing or embedded in finance or embedded in operations or something. And that's I think we need to start more having that. We need to start having more of those conversations to elevate it at that strategic level.
Absolutely. In fact, I think one way to add on to that in a very short statement is I think we need to price with confidence. What do you think? Funny how that works. I think we need to be confident in our actions and in describing what we do, and also in knowing our importance to the organization and to the marketplace, because as we know, you can have an entire industry that can be really relegated and really brought down by one group or a small group of companies that might do suboptimal things, and that can basically lower the profile of entire industries there. So yeah, being confident in what we do, knowing what we do, stop doing dumb stuff, as Mr. Holden would have reminded us time and time again, and basically learning about how we can move the organization forward, learning what's new, the latest and the greatest, how we can look at today's economic uncertainty and what that means for us depending on our geography and depending on our industry or our vertical or something like that, and reacting accordingly. All very, very important things. So yeah, I think that is good stuff.
Good.
That's great.
Good. Well, thank you all so much for joining us and tuning in today, both you gentlemen. Jeet, before we let you go, is there a way that viewers or listeners can access any of your resources that you have to provide to us?
Thanks for that opportunity. Obviously, holdenadvisors.com. They've got the blogs, a lot of white papers and content that's out there, videos as well. And then the book, you can pre-order it right now through barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com. And October 18th is the release date for the book that we're very excited about. So yeah, that's another way.
Good. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much again. Until next time, we hope to see you all who are tuning in with us right now. We hope to see you guys next time. Until then, have a good one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeet. Thanks, Terrence.
Thanks.